Hi, my name is Kelly Santa Rosa. I'm a Senior Policy Analyst with AUMA. Welcome to the first webinar in our Alberta Nutrition Report Card series. The webinar today will focus on the role of municipalities in supporting healthy food choices. I'm very pleased to have Dr. Kim Raine, Professor and Associate Dean at the University of Alberta's School of Public Health, Michelle Louie, Policy Analyst at the Alberta Policy Coalition for Chronic Disease Prevention, and Krista Milford, Project Coordinator of the Benchmarking Food Environments Project at the University of Alberta. And we'll get started, so I'll turn things over to Dr. Raine.
Hi, everyone. Okay, good. Slides are working. I figured out the technology. So I am Kim Raine, and I will start us out with about a short 10-minute introduction about the report card and what it's all about. And really, our focus in the 2018 report card was on looking at what are the potential actions that municipalities can play in supporting healthy food choices. So I'm going to start and with the general introduction, and then we're not going to go in order of the names on this slide here. Krista Milford is going to go second, and she's going to talk about a couple of the food environments. The first few, we will cover the last two at our last three at our next part 2 of this webinar on November 27th. And then Michelle Louie is going to talk, and she's going to speak a lot about some of the resources that are in the hub and point you in direction of where some action can happen. So, see if I can get this to work. Yeah. So every time it works, I get very excited. So background is that we have a growing issue of childhood and youth obesity in Canada, and in Alberta specifically, over a quarter of our youth are overweight or obese, and that's a problem for a number of reasons. First of all, obesity is associated with chronic diseases, things like type 2 diabetes, which used to be called adult onset diabetes, but now is being diagnosed at younger and younger ages. Heart disease, even some cancers are related to to obesity. So it is a problem. We know that healthcare costs are high to treat all of these chronic conditions, and we need to place more emphasis on prevention. And you may say, okay, well, this is all a health issue, but the reality is that what happens in municipalities, what happens in our local environments can have a huge impact on whether or not people have the ability to eat healthily. So that's what this report card is all about, and we'll take you through a few steps to understand how that all works. So, healthy eating, we know it does prevent chronic disease, and eating trends in youth transition into adulthood. So even though we might not see a lot of heart disease, high blood pressure and such among kids, if eating habits are established in childhood, as children age and as they become young adults and then older adults, those eating habits tend to track, so it does increase the risk for chronic disease. But the issue is around healthy eating, it's not really just a matter of individual choice. And I'm actually a dietitian by profession, and I started out my career really, young and naive, and just thought, well, if I tell everybody all about nutrition, they're going to eat everything that I tell them to do. But it became very clear very early that that's not the case, that there are all kinds of factors in our environments that influence our eating choices, and that's what, again, our report card is all about, and hopefully this will become more clear as we move on. So I do want to start with some alarming statistics. This is a global study that is being conducted and has been conducted for the last 15 to 20 years out of the University of Washington. It's called the Global Burden of Disease Study. And they look at different countries and what the causes of premature death and disease, what the causes are in those countries. And in Canada, the most recent data that we have is from 2015. And in terms of the factors that we think that we can control, our behaviors, things like smoking, physical activity, and dietary risks. Dietary risks are actually the leading cause of deaths in Canada. I mean, and they contribute to deaths through things like heart disease, cancers, and type 2 diabetes. So it's now even more of an issue than tobacco. And so if any of you who are old enough to remember when you could smoke in public, which in Alberta actually wasn't that long ago, 10 or 15 years, but if you've ever watched an episode of Mad Men or something like that and see the pervasiveness of smoking in the 60s and 70s, municipalities had a lot of control over how we've now changed the culture where smoking is denormalized. So municipalities had a role in putting policies in place that made smoke-free spaces, for example, around public buildings and parks and places like that. So, we really think that we can learn from lessons in tobacco control and apply them to nutrition, because now we're at the point where nutrition has become more of a concern. So what we're doing with the report card is actually benchmarking food environments. Food environments is just a term that we use to describe how our environment shapes the availability, the affordability, and the social acceptability of our food and nutrition choices. And I put choices in quotes there because sometimes we might not actually be choosing what we would want to choose if we had a different environment. So for example, if you walk into a fast food restaurant and you want to choose something healthy, you might not actually be able to choose something healthy. So, so our choices are being limited and somewhat dictated by the environment within which we live. And there's been an explosion of research in food environments in the last decade, and more evidence is pointing towards the association between our food environments and diet-related outcomes. So things like obesity, diabetes, and heart disease are related to where we live. And this is where municipalities come in, because you have a role to play in shaping those environments. So the nutrition report card then the idea is that we're benchmarking food environments. And all that means is trying to keep track of what's happening in those food environments. We are looking at 5 separate environments, which I'll get into explaining in just a minute, but it's the physical environment, the communication environment, the economic environment, the social environment, and the political environment. And we are also looking at a variety of settings, such as schools, childcare, and broader community settings. What the report card does, and this is just a little screenshot of what the front cover of our 2018 Nutrition Report Card on Food Environments for Children and Youth looks like. It assesses Alberta's current food environment and nutrition policies that impact that environment. Our aim of collecting the data for the report card is to increase awareness and a focus on health promotion and obesity prevention and general healthy eating, really. And it serves as a tool to identify areas that require action. So if we're consistently finding that there's an area where we're scoring an F or a D, we could obviously do better, and perhaps there are ways that we could improve, and hopefully we'll give you some ideas about that today. So these are the environments that the report card covers, and I won't expect you to read all of the tiny little printing here, but I will indicate that the report card is available for download, so you could, if you were interested, download it and review the full 100 and such page report if you're very interested. But basically what we're looking at in terms of benchmarking food environments is that there's been, as I mentioned, there's been a lot of research in this area in the last decade. And it's really easy to sort of say, oh, the environment is making me fat, or the environment is making me choose unhealthy choices. But what can be helpful is if we think about, okay, what is the specifics about those environments and how can we change them? So the physical environment is really all about what's available. What is available to me in my local environment. Are there more grocery stores that offer healthy foods, or are there more fast food restaurants and convenience stores in my community? What's close, what's convenient, what is easy for me to access? That's what the physical environment is all about. And then also what's inside of those spots. Like what do we offer in schools? What do we offer in recreation facilities? That's what the physical environment is all about, the availability. The communication environment, that's basically what messages do we hear. Are children, for example, being bombarded with advertisements for unhealthy foods? Or are they getting messages around healthy eating in schools or external to schools? The economic environment is all about how much does it cost? Is it affordable to eat a healthy diet in your community, or is this a real barrier to people who are living in your community? And the social environment is really about the norms and the values. How acceptable is it to eat well? How acceptable are we making it for example, moms to breastfeed and things like that? And so those are all the different aspects of the environment that we try to get at in the report card. And then all of those four environments are really embedded within policies. And again, as policymakers in a municipality setting, this is where you might have some role to play. So, you can have policies that, for example, set guidelines for what's available within the recreation settings in that physical environment. You can have policies that play a role in whether or not advertising is allowed on bus benches or billboards close to schools, things like that. So there's all kinds of ways in which we're being exposed to messages to promote unhealthy eating. So how can we make it better for healthy eating? And basically in the nutrition report card, we look at those environments and then we break it down and come up with some indicators and benchmarks that we actually grade. So for example, in the physical environment, there are some categories, what food is available within different settings. And then we have some indicators about whether or not we're making the grade. And so within those settings, do we have a high availability of healthy food would be an example. And then a benchmark, and we call it benchmarking food environments. The benchmark is all where the rubber hits the road. We would say, okay, what we want to do, our benchmark that we want to meet is 75%, 3/4 of the foods available in the schools are healthy. That's just an example of how that all works. And I'm not, again, going to go through the details, but we have 37 different indicators that we grade within these 5 environments, and we'll go through some examples of those today. In terms of grading, it's actually not that complicated. We have a group of graduate students and staff who collect information from publicly available sources around what's going on in our foods environments in Alberta, and basically we ask some questions. The first question we ask, was the benchmark met? So to use that example that I just had, are 75% of the foods available in schools healthy? If the answer is yes, you get an A. It's that easy. You meet the benchmark, you get an A. So, well, it's not that easy because we don't give a lot of A's. So what we have tried to do is to not just say it's a yes or no enterprise, but recognize that sometimes people are trying very hard. They might not quite have met the benchmark, but maybe they're partially there. And there are supports and policies in place to help them achieve those. So that's where we get to grade between like a B, a C, a D, that type of thing. So again, we'll show you some examples along the way. Just to give you some highlights, this is actually the 4th annual report card, and we have funding in place to do this report card through to 2021. So 2019, 2020, and 20, so we've got 3 more to do, so we've got 7 years that we'll be looking at. In 2018, the overall grade on the Alberta Nutrition Report Card was a C. We've pretty consistently been a C for the last few years. When we average out those 37 indicators, we dropped down to a D back in 2016. There were a number of policies that had previously been in place that, for example, the government of Alberta stopped funding our childhood obesity interventions, and so that's why we went down to a D back then. But generally, we are looking at a C, and my kids are grown up now, but when they brought home report cards and they had a C, I would say, you can do better. So we think Alberta can do better. And I am now going to pass it over to Krista Milford, who's going to talk a little bit more detail on some of the grades.
Thank you so much, Kim. So now I'm just going to advance. I did it. Okay, good. I did it.
It's exciting when it works.
So as Kim mentioned, our focus for this year's Nutrition Report Card is on municipalities, and they're depicted here in this infographic. We sat down and we chose 15 out of the 37 indicators, and we felt that those were the ones that really were ones that municipalities could take some action on. And so that's why we chose those particular ones. And in the infographic, it shows the settings for those indicators along with recommended opportunities for action, and that's what I'm going to cover in the next couple slides. So within the first environment that we're covering today, so actually I should back up, we're covering two environments today, the physical environment that Kim talked about and the communication environment, and we're going to cover the last three environments in our Part 2 webinar. So the overall physical environment in Alberta received a D. And then in particular, under Indicator 1, which is the high availability of healthy food in school settings, the benchmark, which Kim used as an example, was 3/4 of foods available in schools is healthy. That received a C+. And we really looked at the Alberta School Nutrition Program and the fact that they require meals or snacks to adhere to the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines for children and youth. So we're happy with that. However, we are still seeing a lot of choose least often beverages. Now, when I say choose least often, in the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines for children and youth, there are three designations for food. So it's choose most often, choose sometimes, and choose least often. So when I say choose least often, I'm referring to kind of how they break the definitions up in that guideline. And so that's what we're seeing a lot of, is still the choose least often beverages in school vending machines, along with the majority of food available. So it's not considered healthy. And I'll show you on the next slide some of our findings from the COMPASS study that has a provincial study in Alberta. They found that 72% of the beverages sold in vending machines were choose least often, and the bar graph there further breaks it down into the types of beverages that that's talking about. And you can also see what choose most often is things like water and 100% juice. So if we're in the school settings, what we'd like to see is that all schools make the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines mandatory, thank you, for all beverages served in schools, in addition to make food preparation skills mandatory, which I'll cover in another slide soon. And so we're recommending that municipalities support their local school boards and districts to that end. So if the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines for children and youth is not mandated, then championing of these guidelines in schools is critical, and that community support is critical for them. So when we're talking about mandating, we're also looking at the procurement contracts, which would encompass all food and beverages served within schools, including third-party vendors that would kind of be surrounding the schools and like say for hot lunches and things like that. So that's kind of what it encompasses. We're not talking about what children bring to school from home. So it's anything that's available in the school that we're really talking about. And we also recommend monitoring of the implementation of these food policies, and that's in our Part 2 webinar series as well. That'll get into more of that. For indicator 3, high availability of healthy food in community settings, in particular the recreation facilities, this also received a D. And I'll show you our data on that as well. And that one was from the Eat, Play, Live project. And it again indicates that entrees, vending machine beverages and snacks, along with the majority of concession stand snacks, were rated as unhealthy and choose least often. So what we're recommending is that municipalities mandate recreation facilities to improve food environment by adhering to the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines to inform their food policies and vending contracts. Some recreation facilities are recognizing the importance of healthy eating, and some are voluntarily opting to bring in contracts that facilitate healthy eating. And there are programs in the province that are working to that end. For instance, Communities Choose Well and the Cheers program, as well as AHS registered dietitians are part of that. Indicator 4, high availability of healthy food vendors, also received a D. And in this diagram here, I'll explain a bit about what this is. It's the Modified Retail Food Environment Index from the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention. And this formula calculates the proportion of food retailers that are identified as healthy, so grocery stores, fruit and vegetable retailers, and food wholesalers, and versus the unhealthy, which would be convenience stores and limited service eating places. And that is taken for each census tract, and that's defined by the Canadian Census, Statistics Canada. So a score of 10 would mean that 10% of food retailers are more likely to sell healthful options, so the higher the number, the better. So as highlighted in this figure, you can see that close to 35% of all census tracts in Edmonton and 30% in Calgary met the benchmark of 10 equal to or greater than 10. So there's still 70% on the whole that are not meeting that. So we'd like to see a lot more healthful options, and that can be seen in this little picture here of the grocery store. And so what we're asking is it possible to improve that retail food environment at the local level? Could we consider tax incentives for entrepreneurs with innovative ways of offering healthy foods, and consider the healthfulness of products offered when providing licenses to food trucks? Also, could municipalities use their authority to make changes in zoning policies to improve food environments? For example, when a grocery store closes down, municipalities can prevent covenants from restricting future grocery store potential. Indicator 5 is the limited availability of unhealthy food vendors, and that one received a D. And just looking at this one, so over 4 years that we've assessed the food environments, Alberta has received a consistent D for this benchmark. And benchmark reads, traditional convenience stores and fast food outlets are not present within 500 meters of schools. We know that 77% of schools in Edmonton and 71% in Calgary have at least one convenience store or fast food restaurant within walking distance, which is similar to findings from a random selection of 3 communities across the province that we looked at, which found 80% of schools in High Level, Westlock, and both schools in Sundre had unhealthy food vendors in close proximity. And you can take a look at this map next that shows in the red circles the unhealthy food vendors within that 500-meter range, walking distance from schools. So what we'd like to see is, can municipalities use their authority to make changes in zoning policies to address unhealthy food vendors? When fast food restaurants within 500 meters close down, municipalities can decide what type of food vendor sets up shop next. As well, when new proposals come forward for land use, municipalities can consider a bylaw that restricts unhealthy food vendors within 500 meters of schools. Next, I'll cover the communication environment. Alberta's overall communication environment received a C. Looking at indicator 7, menu labeling is present, received a D since Alberta does not have menu labeling legislation. So according to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, there are no requirements right now that provide for any of these places to provide nutrition information for food served in restaurants, and establishments may voluntarily provide nutrition information on their menus or through other formats. And we do see some of this in informed dining, but it's not consistent across the province. So what we encourage is municipalities to engage local dietitians in working with local businesses to identify healthy choices on the menus. So that might be a way to have just a sticker or some kind of highlighting of what is a healthy choice on the menu. So it could be on the menu or maybe in the form of posters or things like that. For indicator 11, government-sanctioned public health campaigns encourage children to consume healthy foods. This received a C+, and so we're encouraged to see the piloting of a national food skills initiative that includes food skills curriculum, an online hub with cooking videos, and a national recipe challenge and a cookbook. We encourage the use of readily available nutrition education resources, for example, from Alberta Health Services, to promote healthy eating in local settings, such as public buildings, health centers, recreation centers, as well as partnering with local media to promote healthy eating through public service announcements or Ask the Dietitian call-ins or other creative ways in the community to show healthy eating. Indicator 12 is restrictions on marketing unhealthy foods to children, and it also received a D because Alberta does not have official initiatives or policies to limit unhealthy food marketing to children. However, through Canada's Healthy Eating Strategy, we will have some upcoming initiatives looking at this. So this grade is bound to change. When Bill S-228 comes into force, it will impact local advertising, billboards, etc. within municipalities. However, the federal government is unlikely to have resources to monitor these local settings. So taking a stance to ensure no marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages exists in public buildings, close to schools, and daycares is a proactive local way to ensure that your community is providing a safe, commercial-free setting for children. So we encourage you to be a trailblazer. Oops, I skipped over one, thank you. Indicator 14 also received a D, and that's looking at food skills education provided to children in schools, in particular junior high. And it received a D, and the main purpose for this is that it's just not mandatory. So what we found actually in our last year's report card in 2017, that a lot of schools that completed the reporting and reflection tool did report that they offer food skills education for these grades, but it was not mandatory. So approximately half of the districts, about 500 schools, did offer extracurricular cooking classes or programs for their students. So municipalities working with school boards may suggest that home economics be made mandatory for junior high students. Making use of facilities in close proximity to schools, such as recreation centers, to provide cooking classes, community kitchens and gardens can facilitate that hands-on food handling experience when school infrastructure is lacking. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Louie.
Great. Thanks, Krista. So I'll be walking you through some of the tools and resources that are available to you to help support you as you aim to create more supportive food environments. So on the slide here, we have a picture of the AUMA Municipal Resource Hub for Healthy Food Policies. And this hub highlights a lot of the information that we've covered today in the webinar about the report card and the role that municipalities play in healthy eating. And it also has a tools and resources page where you can find all of the resources that I will be covering today. Okay, so I want to start with the Alberta Health Services School Nutrition Hub. This hub has a number of tools to support healthy food environments and schools, and it helps to promote the implementation of the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines for children and youth. The hub includes information on activities for teaching about nutrition, such as lesson plans and little nutrition bites or facts, which can be used as communication tools in things such as posters or newsletters. There are also a number of manuals and toolkits on topics such as school breakfast programs and sports nutrition. And you can download informational posters on how to best fuel your body for activity, which can be hung up in places like recreation centers or in school gyms. And then finally, there are a number of information sheets which can be used for families, schools, and workplaces to guide healthy eating on topics such as healthy snacking, healthy holiday eating, food safety, and how to prepare quick and easy meals. So all of that and more is on the School Nutrition Hub for Alberta Health Services. So this slide highlights a checklist for school menus. It helps to provide guidance to schools around developing meals with healthy food choices. So schools can use this when reviewing their menus for school meals or snacks, or looking at what is on offer for sale at their schools. And the checklist was developed based on Canada's Food Guide. So it can help you to determine whether the overall menu and also specific menu items meet recommendations from Canada's Food Guide. Areas that are checked off as sometimes or not at all can then be really targeted for improvement. So it helps to provide an overview of the environment and also guides you as to where action is needed. Although the checklist was designed for schools, it could also be used as a starting point for other environments in evaluating what food is available. Okay. So the School Zone and Nutrition Toolkit was developed by the Quebec Public Health Association, and it recommends multiple courses of action that municipalities can take if they are wishing to improve the food environment of children. It's specifically looking at limiting the presence of fast food restaurants near schools. So it covers strategies such as land use planning to promote public health and well-being, and things like zoning bylaws, buffer zones around schools, and quotas for the number of restaurants near schools are all covered. And it gives you some details on how to develop these policies and the benefits of them. It gives you information on developing a customized plan for your municipality and highlights successes from other jurisdictions so you can see what has been done elsewhere. So the next project is FAIR, Food Action in Recreation Environments. And this is a project under the Alberta Policy Coalition for Chronic Disease Prevention. And it's really aiming to increase access to healthy and fresh foods in recreational facilities, so really looking at the physical environment. You can find it at apccprecproject.com. And the website contains information about the issue of food availability in rec centers and rec environments, has a number of summaries of relevant evidence and research in this area. And there's also additional resources and toolkits that you can use to help develop a plan. And on the right of this slide is a picture of some stories of policy change in this area, so you can read up about what other jurisdictions are doing and how they've succeeded. So I just want to highlight one of the policy stories that I was talking about on the previous slide. This is the City of Hamilton's corporate food and beverage policy. So in 2011, Hamilton developed a healthy food and beverage policy. The aim of the policy is to demonstrate the city's commitment to healthy eating by being a community role model for food service that is free of industrially produced trans fats, and by promoting a safe and sustainable local food system. So this policy that they've developed applies to all city buildings and public events where the City of Hamilton offers food and beverages, and includes things like food and beverages offered at city staff functions, vending machines, and concession stands within Hamilton's recreational facilities. And so the story really highlights the policy process that Hamilton went through and provides some insights from their experiences in developing this policy that you can use as you move forward with your own policies. It has some key lessons that you can use, and you can find a number of other stories on different issues on the AUMA hub that I highlighted a couple slides ago under the Stories of Healthy Policy Change link. So the Healthy Vending Toolkit was developed by Alberta Health Services, and it aims to help schools, recreation centers, and workplaces take action on healthy vending. It'll guide you through a step-by-step process on healthy vending in your school, recreation center, or workplace, and it includes things like how to build a team, assessing your environment and what's available, developing a plan, creating guidelines and policies, taking action, and evaluating your success. So I highly recommend you check this resource out if you'd like to make changes in your vending machines. And I just want to highlight some quick wins that you can do to improve the food offerings in your vending machines if you don't have time to go through the whole process. So for example, you can move choose most often items to the line of sight in vending machines. And as Krista mentioned, these are food items that we should be eating most often, so things like water, granola bars, fruit, and vegetables. You can also find healthy alternatives to popular choose least often items. So instead of having chips as a snack, perhaps offering nuts. And finally, working with vending suppliers to support your goals. So this slide highlights a tool developed by the Quebec Public Health Association, and it's really looking at banning the sale of energy drinks in public buildings. So it provides a little background information on the issue and some of the health concerns with energy drinks, and then provides a model resolution for municipalities to ban energy drinks in municipal buildings. And so this is a great resource if you're not really sure where to start. You can come to this model resolution and sort of walk through the logic of what the Quebec Public Health Association is recommending, and then perhaps tailor it to your own jurisdiction and your needs. And finally, I just wanted to touch on the Ontario Healthy Menu Choices Act. So I know this is a provincial act, but it requires that food service premises with 20+ locations must display calories on menus for standard food items. Menus must also provide contextual information to educate customers about daily calorie requirements. So this might not be feasible in larger municipalities, but it's a great opportunity for smaller municipalities to work with local businesses and groups that they may already have relationships with to provide this extra information to consumers and to ensure that consumers have the information to make healthy food choices for themselves. Okay, so I just wanted to remind everyone that the second part of our webinar will be on November 27th from 1:30 to 3, and we'll be covering the remaining 3 food environments, so the economic environment, the social environment, and the political environment. And we're really just hoping to facilitate a discussion with the audience now. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about the report card, or if you have questions or concerns specific to your municipality, we're happy to address those. Thanks.
Okay, so we don't have any questions yet. So if you have one, please go ahead and type it in. I was just going to ask, so is the report card is at a provincial level, but is the data available at municipal or community or regional levels?
So it is a provincial report card, and basically, as I mentioned, we use whatever is publicly available. So for example, we're aware of a couple of research projects that are looking at what's available in schools. So basically, we use the data so we don't send people out to check what's going on in the schools. We use the data that's available. So typically what we're presenting is could be somewhat representative. It's often, and that's in some of the examples that Krista showed, you'll see that a lot of times the only data that we have available are from the big cities, from Calgary and Edmonton. And so we have been working, Krista's been doing a lot of this work, with more local communities in developing little mini nutrition report cards. So we have a little app, and people can actually choose if they want to collect data. They don't have to collect data on all 37 indicators, but they could collect data on, say, maybe 5 or 10 on what's happening in their local environment, whether or not there are, for example, unhealthy food vendors within 500 meters of schools. And so then the local communities can actually go out. They can take pictures of the vending machines in the recreation facilities. Then they send it back to us, and we can do a grading. And what's interesting is when we look at the local level, in some cases the local environments are doing better than the provincial average. So for example, Krista talked about food skills. In some of the rural schools, home economics is a requirement, whereas in Calgary and Edmonton, you have 15 other options that you could take. So the local environments are actually scoring higher in that area. And the other interesting thing about the local environments, and Krista, you might want to add some more details here, is that a lot of times, we talk about policy and we think about, okay, changing the marketing environment. That took a Senate bill sponsored by Nancy Green Raine, and that took years for us, and it's supposed to go to vote this week, I actually think, and then it's going to be another year or so before it's actually implemented. But in local environments, if you only have one grocery store, and you notice that the grocery store is putting all kinds of healthy stuff at the checkouts where the kids are sitting in the in the carts and might want to be throwing stuff into the back. It's so easy to go to the grocer and say, hey, the people in this community would like to see less of that in your grocery store, and is there any way that we can work together to make the environment a little healthier for the local people? And so change can happen almost overnight, and that's kind of exciting.
Yes, and I'll just add in too that sometimes with smaller communities, the group of people around the table, they have that type of relationship where if they all are kind of moving towards the same goal, those kind of things change a lot more quickly than in more complex, larger communities where things have to go through multiple levels of approvals or things like that. So sometimes what we're seeing, and it's kind of exciting because I think small towns sometimes don't see how many benefits there are, and I would say that's a huge benefit that they have, is that they can move more quickly and they have those established relationships where people know each other and they can move the agenda forward a lot more quickly. So that's really great to see. And, also I just want to say, too, with this presentation, I'd like to put a question out to the audience, which is, what do you see as possible? Because this is kind of from our perspective. And, as municipalities, you have your agendas of what your daily work is. And how do you see some of this actually fitting into that? Are we kind of off our rocker here asking for, these things to be considered? So we'd like to hear that from you, and what do you think is possible?
Okay, well, we have a comment from Tim Horseman. He says, arguably, it's challenging in a rural versus urban areas to get the grade up. So a lot of examples, but there are some benefits. And so I'm not quite sure if you're agreeing that it's with what we've been saying, that it can be easier in a rural environment given the closeness and then I guess a lot less of the layers of bureaucracy that you would have to deal with at City Hall, or if you think it's more challenging in a rural environment because you don't have the same amount of vendors or businesses or options that you would. I don't know if either of you want to kind of speak to that.
I guess I would like to hear what people think, because, yeah. So Tim says, at times, but not often, more challenging in rural environments. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think there's a number of things happening. There's the capacity. You might have just one person who's really the champion for this, and if that's the case, it's always a struggle, because that person is going to be called into every single meeting to try to present this as an important issue. If you have a group of like-minded individuals who are then working together, they can strategize, you know. So there's all kinds of different ways. I mean, I think if you read the story on the City of Hamilton's, it actually took over a decade to get that healthy food policy in municipal buildings from conception to implementation. You know, so it started out as, hey, why are we serving junk food why are we actually paying, like why are we buying junk food to sell to people when we want to keep our communities healthy? That's kind of how it started. But then you need to have those champions, and in Hamilton's case, it was the local dietitians and community nutritionists who started to make the case, but they had to have the policymakers, the decision makers on board, because, you know, how do you do it is the next step. It's one thing for me as an academic to say, this is really important, we need to improve the health of our environments, but how do you actually do it? That's where you're the experts.
Yeah, and I know, I mean, all kinds of policy change at the municipal level, you usually need someone that's going to champion that policy change, and ideally that person is on your council.
Yeah.
We've got crickets. I don't know. Do you guys think none of this is doable? Do you think it's all really easy and you're already planning how you're going to submit your resolution to your council? We'll just give you a couple more minutes. Otherwise, we'll move on. Our audience is not normally this quiet.
And if this is something that is, you know, even, and I'm assuming that you signed on to the webinar because you do have an interest, because if you didn't have an interest, you wouldn't sign on to the webinar. But, you know, it can seem somewhat daunting, a task, I think, and we're throwing a lot of ideas out there, and obviously it's hard to do everything at once. But the hub that's on the AUMA website has tons of really valuable resources where you can, one, read about how other municipalities had successes and what their struggles were so you can avoid those. And this is not unlike, I mentioned the example of tobacco. You know, in the 80s, communities were looking, well, how did Toronto get a tobacco-free policy in place, and can we do what they did? So that's how municipalities learn from each other, and then eventually there's so many, you've got a critical mass, and then the province passes it, right? So, so there's stories, there's tools, there's samples of resolutions that you could propose to council. There's all kinds of examples there, and you could just look through that maybe before the next webinar and see what excites you and what you think could be potential ways that you could act in your community.
And Allison, I just want to speak to yours a bit about gaining traction. And I think, right now cannabis is a huge issue that municipalities are dealing with. But one of those subcategories is zoning. And so if we're looking at zoning of cannabis, can we not at the same time maybe start to think about zoning of unhealthy food vendors near children as well? Because so it's kind of tacking on these issues where you see a discussion already happening.
We have a comment from Karen Olafson. We are now working on policy in one community that completed the BFE mini report card. It's exciting. Yeah, that's definitely exciting. I don't know if you guys are familiar.
Yes, Karen. Okay. Hi, Karen. She's a dietitian. Yes, and yeah, she worked with us on engaging the local communities. So it's exciting to hear that. We need to catch up on what exactly you're working on there for recommendations. So,
okay. And then Melissa Chisholm, I can see making headway with schools, rec centers, and public buildings, but I can see challenges working with municipalities. I think we need to have those champions in the municipalities to help move issues like this forward. Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think, again, like any issue, you always need someone who's going to buy in it and champion it at municipal level. And I mean, in terms of gaining traction, I would hope it would gain traction before it becomes sort of a healthcare crisis because of the costs. But it sounds like we're already a little bit down that road now. So if you want to be proactive, this would be a good thing to start looking into.
Yeah, and I think sometimes municipalities are looking at, hospital beds and those kind of issues. And so what this presentation is doing is kind of going way further back to supportive environment to prevent before these things happen and hospital beds are needed. So it's really kind of shifting thinking to that preventative stance and health promoting stance. And I think that in and of itself is a huge shift for where municipalities are at right now.
Well, I think to use another example, think about active transportation. And 10 years ago, nobody was talking about active transportation. It was about building more roads so we could get more cars through, right? I mean, now, people are talking about, should we put in bike lanes? What about the LRTs? Like all of those types of things. And those are really important issues that are taking up a lot of time and energy, and appropriately so in municipalities. So, nutrition maybe is the next big thing that has to come along. And the first step is recognizing that it's not just a personal decision. Just like putting in bike lanes facilitates someone taking their bike to work instead of taking their car to work.
Donald Barker has a comment. When I broach the zoning topic with municipal stakeholders, they bring up money and the types of businesses who can afford to set up shop. Do you have any tips to help address this?
Money is always a big issue, right? It's definitely a challenge. The area where I've done the most work is around the restrictive covenants. And so, you have a supermarket that is in, not even the inner city, but, in a mature neighborhood, and then they decide to build a bigger supermarket a little further out and with a bigger parking lot so people can drive to it. And then what they do is they put a restrictive covenant on the old supermarket so that no one can come in and take the potential business that would drive to their new, bigger outlet. And so what you're seeing is you've got value villages as, in the old supermarket spaces. But that is a real challenge for people, for example, an elderly population who live in mature neighborhoods who no longer can get easily to a supermarket. So that's a real challenge. So even so yes, the supermarket has lots of money to set up there, and they want to they're not going to not build that big supermarket out in the suburbs, but does that mean you have to disadvantage those who are still living in the mature neighborhoods, who probably won't get to those suburban supermarkets anyway because of transportation or mobility issues? So I think in that case, it's a matter of political will. Are you protecting the investment of the supermarket, or are you protecting the health of the citizens?
Okay, another comment from Tim. So zoning is very challenging. The municipality would let anyone anywhere right now in Slave Lake. They're business friendly and they're looking to fill vacant spaces. So as mentioned, we just saw all of this with cannabis as they went to 50-meter setbacks, schools, hospitals to squeeze things in and not limit business.
50 meters?
Yeah, municipalities have the authority to pass bylaws to vary distances, either more or less than what was outlined in the provincial legislation.
Wow.
Yeah.
50 meters is not very far.
No.
I swim in a 50-meter pool. It takes less than a minute to swim it, so it would take 20 seconds to walk it. Wow.
And I think, too, a lot of what we're doing today, too, is just raising that awareness. And I think over time, once awareness has been raised about, the overarching mandate of a municipality is the health of its citizens. And so are we focusing on the economic good or the health of citizens? And I think all those things need to be weighed out. And over time, we're hoping that there's a shift towards seeing that health actually in the end can, the health of citizens can actually save money because there's less cost for healthcare. So, all of that kind of works out. But in that just immediate, kind of reaction to this, it's tough because the economy is also at stake for some of these things.
Well, I mean, one thing that they've done in the city of Toronto around corner stores, so, they have some neighborhoods in Toronto where the only source of food is in corner stores. So the public health units actually went in and worked with the corner stores to get refrigeration, to get healthier products. So they worked basically on creating a healthy corner store initiative. So, so we're not talking about business as bad. We're talking about what does the business do for your community. So, really trying to instill that sense of responsibility for creating a healthy environment in the community. We are familiar with one very remote northern community, actually not in Alberta, in the Northwest Territories, in Aklavik, less than 500 people, where there's a convenience store right across from the school, and the school has a healthy food policy, and the convenience store the convenience store operators met with the school, and they decided to come up with a plan to not sell junk food to kids during school hours, so that it really extended the policy of the healthy school food to the convenience store. They can still sell it after hours, and then kids come back with their parents, and so that's a parental decision. But it was a partnership, and so there are things that can be done without completely re-establishing what's there. It's just working at what's offered by that business.
Great. So Zarifa, I hope I said that right. I probably didn't. Is there a way for us to know what specific communities were included in the report?
If you download the full report card and all 100 pages of it, there are several hundred references in there as well. So again, we work with publicly available data, so we don't have the same communities for every indicator. But we clearly state when we describe where we collected the data, where we got the data from. So if you're interested in knowing if data was collected in your community, just take a look at the report card and scan through our sources.
Okay, I don't see any more questions or comments. So let's move on here. So if you have one, go ahead and type it in. But just as Michelle mentioned, so the second part of this webinar where we're going to talk about the other three environments, it's going to happen on Tuesday, November 27th from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. If you haven't already registered for that, you can register at either the AUMA events page or the RMA events page. And as mentioned, there's a link there for the Municipal Resource Hub. It's got all those really good tools, resources, suggestions, ways for you to get started on thinking about how to promote healthy food choices in your municipality. I'd like to thank Kim, Krista, and Michelle for being here today and to promote the resources and try to get all that information into your hands so you can put it into action. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening in, commenting, and asking questions. If you know anyone that wanted to listen to the webinar but was unable to attend, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar. It will also just be posted publicly on AUMA's YouTube channel, so anyone can watch it. But the AUMA and RMA newsletters next week will have a link to it, and we'll also provide a copy of the slides. And that's all for today, so we look forward to talking to you again in a few weeks. Thanks.
Thank you. Please stand by.